Let me give you 4 facts that will make you want to watch this video to the end. Fact number 1. Economically speaking, Uhuru Kenyatta was a very precautionary president, and that is not any different from what we are used to among African presidents. He was a typical African president, taking precaution rather than trying to completely improve the economy. Fact number 2. President William Ruto, the Kenyan president, is the riskiest president in the modern day Africa economy. And we are speaking economic matters here. You will come to understand that some of the economic policies he has undertaken have not been taken or have not been done by any other person across the continent. Fact number 3. Most African countries are in the ICU when it comes to economic matters. Majority of the presidents who are elected, they don't really know what it takes to rescue these countries. And that explains to you why the situation has been the same for a very long period of time. And then finally, fact number 4. The Kenya shillings has depreciated against the dollar from 139 to 163 in 6 months. The truth is that Kenya shillings is now taking its official value. Uhuru Kenyatta's government, they had protected the economy from this depreciation through the monetary policy. So those 4 facts, if you want to understand them, this is a good reason for you to watch this video to the end. Now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel once more. If you are new to this channel, my name is Duncan Robert. I pride myself as a public informant. I am the modern day evangelist of knowledge. I try to empower the public through the little that I know, all the much that I know. What I do is I realized that there is a very big gap when it comes to knowledge. You know, someone once said that if in Swahili, usipojipanga utapangwa. And the same thing applies even matters economic. Yeah? If you don't understand some of the things that are happening, you'll be influenced very easily by people's opinions. And we live in a world where people have platforms where they can speak, people have platforms where they can just say whatever it is that they want to say. And to be honest, I sometimes sit back and listen to the people who lead the country or the people whose opinions get into the households, and it worries me. There's a lot of miscommunication, there's a lot of lack of understanding, and there's a lot of confident ignorance that is being perpetrated across our media platforms. And those kind of things irk me. They just make me want to find a way in which I can talk to the public directly. And I'm grateful that YouTube gives us an opportunity to do this. So what you can expect from this channel is just me interacting with fellow people who have probably a similar mindset, or people who are interested in knowing deeper issues, in understanding concepts at a deeper level, especially matters economics, macroeconomics, matters to do with governmental revenues, expenditures, matters to do with global economy. I'm interested in knowing what is happening across Africa, what is happening in Ghana, what is happening in South Africa. What are some of the things that they are trying to do to improve the economy? And are those things being applied in my own country, Kenya? Or is it that there is a lot of information, is it called asymmetry or symmetry, where the information in Africa is not evenly distributed? Some countries are advanced, while other countries are way back, are falling behind. So sometimes I'm interested in knowing, economically speaking, what are some of the things that are really happening across the continent, and then we get to definitely look inside and educate the public. And I am hoping through this platform, I will be able to empower as many citizens as possible. Look at this channel as a place for awareness creation of important issues that the world needs to know. And the beautiful thing about this channel is that I do a lot of research. So a lot of the things I'm speaking, I am not just giving an opinion from my own feelings or from my own prejudices. I am giving an opinion based on information that I have verified myself, and I'm able to communicate facts and figures. Now, on to today's topic. My goal today is to let you into what is happening in Kenya. Unless you're a stranger to our country, you know right now that number 1, interest rates are off the roof. Number 2, the Kenya shillings has depreciated significantly. Can you imagine, between June and now, it has moved from 139 June 2023 to now February 2024. It is now at around 163. It is scary because you know the depreciation of a currency is not a good thing. Because it means when you want to import commodities, you will have to sacrifice a lot of your local or a lot of your currency You'll have to sacrifice a lot of your currency for you to be able to get those commodities. And that tends to have an inflationary effect into the economy. So things will become expensive. Things will become expensive, and life, the cost of living will definitely be unbearable. So having the exchange rate stabilized is a priority to most countries. And because of that, I had to find a way to explain to my fellow Kenyans and to other people who might want to understand exactly what is happening to our country. And should we be worried? Is it a time that we should now be worried about? Because we have just come from an election and the current president is barely 2 years old. So is it that the current president is getting things wrong? Is it that the former president left things in a bad state? Or is it that Kenyans are just noisy? It reminds me of when I'm watching football, Manchester United fans and their they're called noisy neighbors. they call the Manchester City fans noisy neighbors. So when I talk about noisy neighbors, is it that our country, people are just noisy? Is it that we just love to complain? And guys, complaining is a very irritating behavior. People who complain constantly can irritate you. I don't know whether you've spent time around complainers. Yeah, nothing seems to be making them happy in life. They look around and everything in life is just, they complain about food, they complain about the government, and the problem with complaining too much is that the world is a ball of energy, and the energy that you dissipate, it attracts. You attract. The energy that you dissipate, you attract. So even when it comes to the matters of economy, please remove yourself from that group of people who just complain. Introduce yourself to a group of people who try to really understand what is happening. Because probably by understanding what is happening, you might find a very good reason to start believing and to start trusting the process. Because maybe this is just a way of the economy adjusting itself now to become better. But if you are someone who constantly complains, and I have noted something, all the guys who complain about the government, about administration, about leadership, they have complained throughout. Ever since the former presidents were there, as in our country, Kenya, they complain about President Moi, they complain about President Kibaki, they complain about Uhuru Kenyatta, they are complaining about William Ruto. So the question is, so who is better? Who is that person that you want to lead you? Sometimes in life, it's good we just accept that we have this president, and the president probably is just doing something and he's not getting it right. And people learn. Everything in life is about learning. So maybe within a short period of time, William Ruto will learn that maybe the policies he was trying to implement didn't work or are not working. And then he'll just now readjust. And I'm so sure I'm not a pro-government. I don't support the current government. But it doesn't mean that I can't look at what the government is doing and just try to understand what they're doing. So what that means is have an open mind, guys. Especially on a channel like mine, have an open mind. Be people who are willing and ready to try and understand the actual concepts. And today, I'm going to take you right into it. Let's try and demystify exactly what is happening in the country, Kenya. Number one, the economy of Africa, or Africa's economy, most of our countries, guys, are in the ICU. It is unfortunate, and most people will not want to agree, but African countries are in the ICU. It just takes one global crisis, one good global crisis, and most African countries will be on their feet. There is no sufficient reserve for them to support themselves. Most African countries are struggling with food insecurity. Even at present, there are some countries that cannot feed their people. And you wonder why. So what happens is, in the event that there is just a crisis, then we are completely messed up. And also the other factor is that, when you are running a country or you're a leader in any form, in any unit of governance, you always want to have very good control. You always want to understand all the factors and the issues that are affecting your people. Because in the process, what happens is you can be able to know all these other factors, what factor to adjust accordingly and what factor not to touch. But the problem with African countries, even the presidents that are in here, they have no full control, guys. They have no full control of these economies because the economies are vulnerable. They are exposed to the international economy. They are over-reliant on what other countries are producing. So when you are over-reliant on other countries on basic things that like steel, basic things like food, basic things like technology, because in the modern world, technology is driving development. So if you are not producing anything of your own and you have to constantly rely on those other economies, what happens to you when those other economies are not doing well? Automatically you are affected. So it tells you that when it comes to a lot of sectors in the developing countries' economies, the presidents completely don't have much control, as much as we will want to believe they do. And it will only take a president probably who is very drastic, who is very radical, and who is a risk taker to try and change that situation. But of course, that will come with its own fair share of consequences. So as we proceed, you will start seeing exactly the biggest dilemma that most African presidents find themselves in. Think about our economies as a patient in the ICU. All our former presidents have been managing our economy within the ICU. All presidents come, they look around, then they realize, wow, whatever the task ahead is not feasible. It's not easy to do this thing. So what they do, they just try to manage the economy within the ICU until they hand it over to another president. And then the other president also manages it within the ICU and then hands it over to the next president. So what happens is there is never a president who just comes and then tries to find a way of getting these countries out of the ICU. In short, there has not been so many presidents who have come to try and completely get our economies from this overdependence on the international economy, overdependence on our trading partners, and trying as much as possible to produce internally to make the country self-sustainable. Because that venture, that avenue of growth is not an easy task. And so most presidents avoid it. Yeah? Most presidents don't focus a lot on that aspect. Allow me now to introduce you to our former president, Uhuru Kenyatta. Like I've told you, Uhuru Kenyatta was a typical African president. He managed the economy within the ICU, and he received the economy when the economy was almost leaving the ICU. I think President Kibaki was the best president Kenya has had since independence. And I can tell you for a fact that President Kibaki almost took Kenya out of the ICU. And when the next president came, who is now Uhuru Kenyatta, he now affirmed the position in the ICU. He just made sure that we now take full position in the ICU. But what Uhuru Kenyatta did, like I told you, was a typical African president. He just managed the country within the ICU and left. It means there are two ways in which you can spur economic growth, or you can ensure that the economy is stable. You can stabilize the economy just through the monetary policy approach, or you can stabilize the economy through the market forces, through allowing the forces of demand and supply, forces of consumption and production to interact and spur the economy to success. Now, like I've told you, most presidents avoid that avenue of economic production because it's not easy. Now, this other avenue is what most presidents use. So what they do is there are some three important factors in an economy. We have inflation, we have, of course, the exchange rates, and then we have interest rates. Those three components of the economy are very critical to how prices will behave, to how consumer behavior will behave, towards how public opinion will be formed. Public opinions are formed around exchange rates, interest rates, and inflation. So if you manage to find a way of just balancing those three aspects, then there is a probability the public might not feel as bad as when you don't manage those things. So monetary policy is the avenue through which you just try and use money supply as a tool to make sure that those three variables are stable. And what Uhuru Kenyatta did, he focused a lot on the monetary policy side of it. He used a lot of the central bank's approach and tools to try and manage the economy. And what that means is when Kenya's exchange rates or the Kenya shillings was depreciating, the moment he noticed that the Kenya shillings is depreciating, he will approach the CBK and the Monetary Policy Committee, and then he will let them know that they need to tighten the economy. So that means they need to reduce money supply. When you reduce money supply, it has a way of increasing interest rates. It causes the demand for the Kenya shillings to rise. Then automatically the Kenya shillings will start stabilizing against the currencies that are demanding the Kenya shillings. And most of the time is, of course, the dollar. So he will try to play around with that and the dollar will stabilize. So what that tells you is that he protected the Kenya shillings significantly using the CBK. There was a lot of monetary policy used during President Uhuru Kenyatta's time to try and manage exchange rates. But this is the catch now. Even though he was sorting the interest rate side and the exchange rate side, he was forgetting about one thing: inflation. When all these things were happening, now the production side was suffering, because while there was not so much that he did on the production side, and I have looked at those numbers, production was really going down. It was either just stabilizing, or it was dwindling. And as a matter of fact, it means our domestic output went down, or it wasn't sufficient, or it wasn't significant enough for us to tremble the global economy. So our domestic output remained low. And because of that, it means that there are a lot of goods and services that we over-relied on the global economy to give us. So we imported a lot. There was a lot of importation during President Uhuru's time. Now, that importation always has an inflationary effect on our local economy in terms of prices. So things become expensive locally. What happens is inflation, of course, will go up. But President Uhuru Kenyatta was very comfortable with now managing the exchange rate. So he devised another way of now trying to reduce inflationary pressures. And that is what you guys have been hearing called consumption subsidies. So he used the consumption subsidies to manage these inflationary pressures. And at the end of the day, so the three factors of inflation, interest rates, and exchange rates, he managed them now. So he will give the traders and the importers, he will tell them, please maintain the price of commodities at that price that the economy is used to. Maintain it at that price. And then the difference between what you are selling versus what you could have sold, then the government will give you something called consumption subsidies. Now, guys, subsidies are expensive. Subsidies are expensive. And as such, Uhuru did that. And unfortunate bit about our country is that we have people who every day they sit down and just try to think of how they can take advantage of public resources. So while that was agreed, these guys went ahead and hoarded. They already now saw that the government is desperate. So what they did is they would hoard their commodities, which will create an artificial shortage. And when there is an artificial shortage, or when there is any form of shortage, of course the prices will shoot. So while they have agreed with the government, then they go and hoard, and now the prices will shoot as a result of shortage. And then they will release the products, and then they'll sell those products at the price which they wanted to sell. So they're getting money from the government, and they're also getting money from the people. And Uhuru soon realized that these guys are taking advantage of him. And I think I remember very well, there was a period where the economy was at a standstill. Nothing was moving because he refused to pay them the subsidies. And also they refused to release goods into the market. And there was a time you could not find even sugar on the shelves. You couldn't. There was a time maize flour was not there on the shelves. So you can imagine the kind of power plays that was happening. But eventually he managed to come into an agreement with them, and Uhuru managed to do those kind of things. So you can clearly see that the production side of the economy struggled. And that means that Kenya's economy was not really operating at a true market equilibrium. A true market equilibrium is when you let the demand and supply forces dictate the market or dictate the macroeconomy. That was not happening because Uhuru was protecting the economy from the CBK. Now, remember those subsidies I've told you, the consumption subsidies are expensive because at the end of the day, if you're not supporting, if production is not increasing, the question is, where does the government get money to pay those subsidies? If you're not generating revenue as a government from domestic output, where will you get the money to pay subsidies? That is the problem that Uhuru realized very soon. And now, since he didn't want to mess up the stability in the interest rates, in the inflation and all that, he had now to figure out a place where he could get that money. He already knew now that the economy will not give him the money that he's looking for. So where will he find the money? Of course, the easiest avenue through which almost African presidents follow, they went and borrowed. And you can now understand why Kenya's debt situation ballooned during Uhuru's tenure, especially towards the end. So he borrowed and borrowed and borrowed to, of course, pay the subsidies and, of course, to support government operations, like is always the case. And that is why we got ourselves to the place that we got ourselves into. So I hope, guys, we are together. I hope you now understand how everything arrived where we are. And then came President William Ruto. President William Ruto observed, and I think he saw that consumption subsidy is not having the impact in the economy that a subsidy should be having. Because Ruto believes that the subsidies should be subsidizing production, because production has a bigger multiplier effect to the economy. That if production is good, if the domestic output is good, the multiplier effect of the economy is bigger than the multiplier effect of consumption.